The Whitaker mansion looked like a dream, but behind its towering marble columns and manicured hedges, it was a battlefield, one where 17 nannies had fallen. None lasted more than a handful of days. The children inside weren't just unruly, they were grieving, broken, and angry at a world that had taken their mother and kept throwing strangers at them like band-aids on a cracked foundation. Eliot Monroe knew this before he walked through the gates, but he came anyway. He arrived with no suitcase, just a faded cookie tin, a second-hand coat too thin for November, and a heart that hadn't stopped aching since his husband died of cancer a year ago. The world had moved on. Eliot hadn't. He was 32, unemployed, and untethered. Once an art teacher who taught kids how to draw their feelings with color, he now only carried charcoal grief. The mansion's door swung open, revealing luxury and silence. Too much silence. The kind that screams something is wrong. Then a crash broke through it. A vase. Screams followed. Laughter. Tiny, angry laughter. Eliot was led to the living room by a nervous housekeeper whispering, "Good luck." Inside, chaos bloomed. White furniture ruined by muddy handprints. Paint streaked like battle scars on the walls. Feathers floated in the air from eviscerated pillows. In the center stood three small boys identical in face. Not in rage. Tommy, the tallest, pointed a toy truck straight at Eliot's chest. "We don't want you," he barked. "We want our mama." His brothers, Danny and Bobby, flanked him like bodyguards. Tear-streaked cheeks, trembling fists. And still, Eliot didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't wave a contract or remind them who paid him. Instead, he knelt right there in the ruins of what was once a luxurious sitting room and opened his cookie tin. Inside were a few ginger snaps and a crumpled photo of a smiling man with bright eyes. "This is Ben," Eliot said quietly, not expecting them to care. "He was my husband. Cancer took him away last winter." The boys went still, confused. The tantrum paused. "I don't have much left," Eliot added. "But I'm here, Dem. I know how it feels to lose someone and not want to let anyone else in. I'm not asking to be liked. I'm just asking for a chance to stay." They didn't speak, but Tommy didn't throw the truck. Not yet. That night, Eliot stayed. He made no demands, gave no lectures. He tucked himself into a guest room and watched the moon through a high window, wondering if he'd be gone by morning like the rest. But when he woke, he found three small drawings slid under his door scribbles of a sad man holding cookies. He smiled for the first time in months. By noon, one of the boys threw a handful of spaghetti at his head, but Eliot didn't leave. He stayed, with nothing but patience, grief, and that same broken heart. And that's when the story really began. He wasn't just another caretaker. He wasn't looking for a job to keep. He was searching for something lost. Not a salary, a reason to get up, a reason to come home, and maybe, just maybe, a reason to believe love could exist again in the unlikeliest of places, inside a house that had driven everyone else away. If you want to hear what happened next, stay with us. Subscribe to Heart Story and follow the journey of Eliot, the man who walked into chaos with nothing but cookies and taught a broken family how to breathe again. Because sometimes it's not about saving others, it's about staying long enough to let them save you. Mornings in the Whitaker house began with spilled cereal, plastic swords clashing against antique furniture, and questions Eliot had never expected to answer. Do ghosts cry? Can moms hear you in heaven? Why did she leave if she loved us? Eliot never lied, but he never rushed either. When Tommy shoved a crayon into the toaster, Eliot unplugged it and calmly asked if the toaster had said something rude. When Danny refused to wear anything but pajamas for 3 days straight, Eliot complimented his style and called it Fashion Week. And when Bobby screamed until his voice broke, Eliot sat beside him, silent, until the storm passed. The house was filled with noise, but Eliot had learned to hear the quiet beneath it. The confusion, the sadness, the yearning. They didn't need discipline. They needed safety. Each night he told them a story, sometimes made up, sometimes from his own past. Stories of a boy who lost his dog but found a starlit path home. Stories of how he once painted an entire wall with his husband, Ben, just to feel something again after a bad diagnosis. And always, stories where love didn't disappear even if the person did. John Whitaker listened sometimes from the hallway. He never interrupted. A tall, exhausted man with permanent creases on his forehead, he kept himself buried in conference calls and medical tech proposals. But lately, he lingered longer. One evening, he walked in just as Eliot was teaching the boys to bake chocolate chip cookies from scratch. "You use both hands," Eliot told them, his own dusted in flour, "because it takes two to make something good rise." John didn't smile then, but he stayed. Even cleaned the mixing bowl in silence. Later that night, while the children snored under a blanket fort, John poured 2 glasses of wine in the study and asked Eliot why he hadn't left. His voice was rough, the kind used by men who carried too much without saying a word. Eliot didn't answer right away. He held his glass without drinking and stared at the fireplace, where embers whispered what words couldn't. "I lost my husband a year ago," he finally said. He wanted to adopt. We were going to be dads. Then chemo came, and silence followed. I never got to be what I'd prepared my whole life to be. Not a teacher, not a partner, not a father. John looked at him differently then, not with suspicion, but with the weary curiosity of a man who recognized pain when he saw it. "I'm not here for your money," Eliot added. "I'm here because your sons made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Needed." And he was. The boys began waiting for him at the top of the stairs each morning, wrestling to be the first one into his arms. Tommy handed him drawings with Eliot in the center. Danny asked for help building Lego castles. Bobby started calling him my favorite cookie man. Even John changed. He left the office earlier. He sat at the dinner table again, and one night he asked Eliot if the boys might like planting a flower bed in their mother's memory. They did. They chose sunflowers. Spring was still far away, but in that garden of grief, something had started to grow. What no therapist, tutor, or strict caretaker could offer. Eliot gave freely a quiet, steady love, not built on authority, but on understanding. Not every bruise needs a bandage. Some just need time and someone who refuses to leave when it's inconvenient. The boys still had tantrums. Eliot still had sleepless nights. But healing wasn't linear. It was made of small, stubborn choices to show up again and again. And love, when rooted in grief, doesn't bloom loudly. It grows in whispered bedtime stories, shared cookies, and muddy fingerprints on an apron someone forgot to wash. Because sometimes, a broken heart makes space for the kind of love that doesn't walk away even when every instinct says to run. It began with a headline, bold, accusatory, and dripping with venom, grieving billionaire hides, troubled children behind closed doors, with a gay nanny. The story spread faster than truth ever could. No one in the Whitaker household saw it coming. Not Eliot, who was halfway through building a papier-mâché volcano with the boys when his phone buzzed with frantic messages. Not John, who had just finalized a new round of funding for a pediatric medical startup. And certainly not the children, who only knew Eliot as the man who taught them how to color outside the lines and love without fear. The source of the leak was a former nanny, one who hadn't lasted a week before quitting in frustration, bitter, resentful, and well-connected to a tabloid editor hungry for scandal. She sold her version of the truth: 3 emotionally unstable children, an absent father, and a suspiciously affectionate male nanny who had grown too close to them. The internet didn't hesitate. Comments flooded, in some mocking, others vicious. Eliot was painted as predatory, irresponsible, a threat. Words like inappropriate and unnatural were thrown around without understanding or pause. By evening, the headmaster of the boys' elite school had called with concern. Parents were asking questions. Sponsors were withdrawing from John's upcoming initiative. And the most terrifying notice came from Child Protective Services. A surprise inspection was scheduled within the week. John paced the study in silence, while Eliot stood by the window, numb, Not with guilt, but with the familiar ache of being misjudged for simply existing. "Do you want me to go?" Eliot finally asked. "No," John replied, but the hesitation in his voice betrayed the war waging inside him. That night, the house was quiet, too quiet. Eliot tucked the boys in as usual, but they clung to him tighter than before. Tommy, who had once thrown toy trucks in protest, now whispered, "Are they going to take you away?" Eliot didn't have the answer, but he stayed. He always stayed. The next day, reporters appeared outside the gates. Cameras clicked each time Eliot stepped out for groceries. Headlines twisted his past, framing his years as a teacher as calculated proximity to minors. No one cared that his file was spotless. No one cared that Ben, his late husband, had once been a pediatric oncologist who dreamed of opening an art school for sick children. The world didn't want nuance. It wanted outrage. John tried to shield the family. He offered to relocate the boys temporarily. He suggested lawyers, statements, press conferences. But Eliot refused to hide. "If I leave now," he said, "they'll learn that being different is dangerous, that love makes you vulnerable. I won't be part of that lesson." But the pressure mounted. Eliot was no longer just the man who had brought warmth back to the mansion. He had become a symbol. To some, of hope. To others, of scandal. The day before the CPS inspection, a heated board meeting forced John to reconsider Eliot's presence in the home. Investors threatened to withdraw. Partnerships hung in limbo. One advisor bluntly told him, "You can save your company, or you can protect your image." That night, Eliot sat in the garden alone. The sunflower bed had started to wither in the cold. He traced the rim of the cookie tin in his hands. The one thing he had brought with him when he arrived, now filled with scribbled notes, crayon drawings, and folded paper airplanes from the boys. He didn't sleep. At dawn, footsteps echoed on the marble floor. All three children stood at his door, pajamas wrinkled, eyes wide. Tommy carried a sign scrawled in marker, "Don't take Eliot." Danny held a stuffed bear Eliot had sewn the week before. Bobby simply wrapped his arms around Eliot's leg. They didn't understand court orders or public relations, but they understood love. And they knew, even without words, that someone was trying to take it away. John watched them from the stairs. Something in his posture changed. Less CEO, more father. For once, not calculating risk or return. Just a man facing a decision: protect his legacy or fight for his family. That morning, as the sun cast long shadows across the quiet rooms of the mansion, John made his choice, and the storm was far from over. But beneath the noise, something unshakable had taken root, not just between Eliot and the children, but in what they all now represented: the undeniable power of care that refuses to bow to fear. Because the greatest threat to any false narrative is not argument, it's presence. Unapologetic, unwavering presence. The inspectors from Child Protective Services arrived at 9 sharp. Their presence filled the Whitaker mansion with a silence far more intimidating than chaos. Suits pressed, clipboards firm, voices measured. They walked through the rooms not as guests, but as quiet judges of a story already partially written in headlines. Eliot greeted them with calm, not rehearsed calm, but the quiet steadiness of someone who had nothing left to prove, only something left to protect. Instead of hiding the children away, he invited the agents into the heart of the house. "Today," he said gently, "you'll join us for something we call a day together." It wasn't staged, no lines, no camera-ready smiles, just what the boys had come to expect from Eliot: truth, rhythm, care. They began in the playroom, not with screens or toys, but with paint and paper. Eliot gave each of them a question. "If you could talk to your mom today, what would you say?" The boys painted answers in color. Tommy painted a yellow sun with a heart inside. Danny drew 3 stick figures with angel wings and tiny cookies in their hands. Bobby painted a blue circle, dark in the middle, bright at the edges. "That's what my tummy feels like when I miss her," he explained. The agent said nothing, but they watched. Later, in the kitchen, Eliot led a baking session. Each child followed a step, measured sugar with trembling precision, cracked eggs with more confidence than the week before. We bake together because it teaches patience, Eliot explained casually. And sometimes waiting for something good reminds us that things don't always come fast, but they come. They moved on to storytelling in the garden. The boys each read aloud from the small books Eliot had helped them make. Stories with dragons, astronauts, and fathers who never gave up. One tale ended with the words, "The brave man stayed, even when the village said he shouldn't." By midday, the agent's pen slowed. They still took notes, but the atmosphere had shifted. No longer a house under suspicion, a home trying to heal. John had been quiet until then, always hovering, always present, but silent. He wore his usual tailored suit, but the lines on his face were softer now. Less armor, more man. After lunch, he asked for a moment to speak, not in private. In front of everyone, the agents, the staff, the boys, and Eliot. "I've built companies," he began, voice low but steady. "I've presented to shareholders, pleaded with investors, spoken to rooms that decide the fate of billions. But I've never had to speak like this as a father." He looked at his sons, then at Eliot. "When Sarah died, I didn't just lose my wife, I lost my sense of direction. I filled the house with professionals, thinking I could manage grief like a business. But grief laughs at efficiency. And children? Children don't need someone to manage them. They need someone to kneel in their wreckage and say, 'I'm still here.'" That's what Eliot did. He turned fully to the inspectors. "You came here to determine if my children are safe, and I'll tell you they weren't. Not until he arrived." For a moment, no one spoke, but something shifted. Something permanent. By late afternoon, the inspectors concluded their visit. No immediate action, no forced removals. Just one final comment from the senior officer, barely above a whisper. "Keep doing what you're doing." The headlines didn't vanish. Some sponsors pulled out. One investor called John's public stance commercial suicide, but he didn't backpedal. Instead, he held a press conference the following week. No podium, no script, just him, Eliot, and the boys hand in hand, surrounded by microphones and flashes. He didn't speak of damage control. He spoke of rebuilding. "I didn't hire a nanny," he said. "I found someone who gave my son back their voices and gave me back my place in their world." Some headlines softened, some didn't, but the world kept turning. And inside the Whitaker home, something had changed forever. Because when a child sees an adult stand up for love, not in theory, but in public, at risk, without shame, it teaches them more than any bedtime story ever could. That being loved loudly is not a weakness. It's what makes a family unbreakable. The official letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Plain envelope, no gold seals, no fanfare, just a folded piece of paper with a court's decision typed in neutral ink. But for Eliot Monroe, it might as well have been a sunrise after the longest night. He was now, by legal recognition, the second guardian of Tommy, Danny, and Bobby Whitaker. The request hadn't come from a lawyer. It hadn't been strategized or pressured. It was a choice submitted voluntarily by John Whitaker himself, the same man who once believed stability came from distance, who tried to solve grief with calendars and protocols, now stood in the kitchen holding back tears as the boys bounced around the room, chanting, "You're our real family now." Eliot did not know what to say, but the boys did. They handed him a small box. Inside were 3 pieces of paper, each written in shaky handwriting. "Dear Judge," one read, "Please let Eliot be our second dad. He makes the world feel safe again." Another simply said he stayed when everyone else left. That night, Eliot didn't read a story to them. Instead, he told them one they had never heard in full about a man who had loved deeply, lost everything, and believed he would never be whole again. And how, somehow, 3 small boys, loud and wild and messy, had stitched his heart back together. But the ending hadn't been written yet. The following month, Eliot asked John to meet him in the garden, in the exact spot where the boys had planted sunflowers in memory of their mother. The stalks had grown tall now, bending toward the sky, golden and brave. Eliot didn't kneel. He didn't bring a ring. Instead, he held out 3 bracelets, hand-woven, imperfect, bright with mismatched beads. "They helped me make these," he said. "I figured if I was going to ask you to build a life together, it should start with them." John didn't speak right away. He just pulled Eliot close, held his face, and whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The wedding was quiet, no cathedral, no luxury hotel, just a garden. The boys in tiny bow ties, and Eliot in a soft blue vest that matched the color of the sky that day. They exchanged vows under the same tree Sarah had once read to her sons beneath. And when the wind blew, carrying petals and laughter, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the part of the story where everything finally made sense. At the small celebration afterward, the boys stood on makeshift crates, each holding a piece of paper folded into fourths. Tommy cleared his throat. "Thank you, Dad John," he began, "for making us feel safe, but mostly thank you, Dad Eliot, for showing up when no one else did." Danny took over, holding Bobby's hand. "You didn't just take care of us. You helped us remember Mom. You helped us remember ourselves." And Bobby ended with the quietest voice of all. "We're not alone anymore." That fall, Eliot published a children's book. He illustrated it using artwork the boys had drawn fingerprints turned into animals, stick figures with massive hearts, crayons swirled skies. The title was simple, not the babysitter, the one who stayed. It hit shelves quietly, then spread by word of mouth. Parents wrote in saying they wept. Teachers ordered copies for their classrooms. LGBTQ+ families called it a mirror they hadn't known they needed. But for Eliot, the only review that mattered came from the 3 little boys who now called him Dad. Because in a world that too often measures people by their resumes, reputations, or roles, he had discovered that the truest impact comes from the ones who keep showing up, no matter the headlines, no matter the risk. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stay. And now tell us, what would you call the person who stayed when everyone else left? Let us know in the comments. Your words matter. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in second chances again, subscribe to Heart Story, because here we don't just tell stories, we tell the ones that stay with you.